republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Move on to item 4, the consent agenda.
Minutes of the regular council meeting held September 28, 2015. Minutes of the Finance Committee meeting held October 5th, 2015. Minutes of the Utilities Committee meeting held October 5th, 2015.
Mr. Van Buren.
Move to accept the consent agenda as read.
Mr. Goodell.
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to accept the consent agenda as read. Are any questions? Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Buren?
Yes.
Mrs. Vasil? Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Mr. Goodell,
Second.
there's a motion and a second to excuse Mr. Bukovac because he has a letter on file. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed say nay. Motion is carried 6-0. We have 2 items on the agenda tonight. The first one is A15-46, the 2016 interim budget with the emergency clause. Mr. Mayor.
Yes, first of all, I'd like to thank Deputy Auditor for all the work she did in putting into this. As you council knows, this is only the first 3 months for the 2016 before we do the permanent budget in 2016. And this is the budget that we put together to get us through the first 3 months. And most of these, as you notice in all the line items, some of them have a P and some of them have an F and some have an H, which is a designation of, the P is for partial, the H is for half, and the F is for full. And basically, we've done, of course, a balanced budget, and we've submitted this, and we're asking for the emergency clause so we can get over to the county auditor in time. And there are a couple items I'd like to bring to your attention in this budget that are a little different than last time. If you'll see in page 3, under the mayor's budget, we had to increase that by the insurance, which is $14,500, because we didn't know the mayor's situation, so we assumed they would take it. If they're not going to take it when the new mayor takes office, we'll just pull it out for the permanent budget. Also, under the fire department on page 2, you see we've got $80,000, which is a partial in there, but this is to cover, Chief Nortime is retiring at the end of the year, and we're going to have a new chief, and the way he's taking his retirement, he's not taking a lump sum, he's taking it as it's paid out per pay. So for a period of time, for the first 3 months, we'll be paying 2 fire chiefs from that account. Takes care of that one. And you'll notice in the street department, I think that's page 201 on page 7. See, we know on salt we're going to pay more for salt this year, so we put the full amount in there of $190,000 is our estimate. And the last one, that's just a major one that I bring to your attention, is that we put half on page 14. Last year we budgeted $5 million for the interim under the electric energy purchase, and this time, just for safety and make it a partial, we put it in $5,460,000. So if any other questions, I'd like to defer to the auditor, have him make some comments on the budget.
Yeah, working with the mayor and the administration, again, this budget is a balanced budget. It's just for the first 3 months. The majority of this will roll into the permanent budget, such as my budget, council's mayor's budget. A lot of those will roll into the permanent budget when we come to you probably in February. Thank you.
Comments or questions? Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I marked a couple different things that you addressed. This can go to Mr. Mayor, or the auditor, whoever's on this, put this together. I know you guys usually collaborate on that. My understanding now, after you stated the new chief, retiring chief covering that difference of wages, is that to pick up his,
That includes his buyout,
thank you,
yes.
that's what I'm here. And then, so in other words, that buyout will be being paid out while our new chief is in place.
Right. In other words, rather than him taking a lump sum, he's taking his increment payments.
And we have to pay PERS on that as well, pay
Right.
Medicare on that as well, and that's
Yeah.
why
The
that,
other increases, as you notice in the budget, are workers' comp, PRS, and that type of thing, that she tried to estimate what the best she could based on the next year's budget.
all related to this.
Yes, but the thing is, these are guesses right now because we don't have all the facts. We don't have the carryover or anything like that. So as the auditor said, this is just to get us through the first really 2 or 3 months till we pass the permanent budget.
We had a big increase under page 1, under the police department, under part-time wages. Did we pick up another part-time?
No, what we did was
You
we
know,
included hopefully the entire wages for the whole year.
So you're budgeting for the entire year?
Yeah, hopefully. Now, the chief has looked at this, and every department head did review this, by the way. And we believe that some of these numbers, where there's a slight increase, that they will cover for the whole year.
Oh, nice. That's going to answer my question on a few of these then, and you probably could just keep giving me yep, that's another example of that. We had, continuing to move over, I marked some pages here. The increase in the mayoral, like you said, was the health insurance possibility of taking it or not on page 3.
Can you tell us what
Page
pages you're on?
3, on page 3, mayor's budget, 100,7001. And that was what you're referring
See,
to?
I don't
We were moving
take the insurance.
Correct.
So next year, who's ever mayor, I didn't know whether they were gonna take it or not, so I put it in, we can always pull it out
better to
for the
budget.
permanent budget.
Okay. And that, okay. And then there was a large increase in the treasurer's office for contracts and professional services.
Page?
We look page 5, which would be the 100 fund. And that is, we see from 5,000 to 16,000, and that's a little over 300% increase. And then the bank charges, looks like another sizable increase. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, the contracts and professional services, the increase there is in large part due to the contract for our bond investment, but we will make that up on the other end, so.
Is that with that one agency that we brought in? I can't recall their names. Meter, thank you. And the bank charges, the bank card charges, is that a new way we're taking in money?
I just think these are estimates, and these just have to do with the costs associated with more online kind of, or not online, but more electronic payments, I should say.
So we are incurring
Well, it's a budget, it's not an actual
Right.
expense. We're anticipating that we would have that cost.
that's large, especially after 14 was 6,500 interim. And I guess when we get the new budget, that may incorporate the entire year, possibly. Is that what we're looking at maybe? In this
Could
case
be.
as well?
Could be.
Could be. Page 7 of 7 and 16, page 7. You'd stated that 27% increase is because we're expecting salt,
That's what our
Right.
guesstimate, our minimum purchase to be.
making their money back for their fines that
We
they...
already got that check back, $13,000. We already deposited, we're ready to spend it.
Yeah, I'm glad we got that back. I just find it interesting how they're going to make their money back off of us later on that they got fined for. And then if you stay on that page under state highway, we have contracts and professional services from,
Okay, this
What's
is,
that?
I'll try and shorten up the story for you real quickly. In fact, the law director, myself, the council president, and the safety service director are going to Ashland tomorrow For years, we've been paying $2,000 a year for the maintenance of State Route 2. Last year, they came to us and said, you're not doing this right, you're not paying us enough. And they said, you gotta start paying what it really costs us to maintain State Route 2. Salt, repairs, guardrail, ditches, mow the grass, the whole ball of wax. And they said, we know we can't, and they gave us some costs, and they know they can't shock our system. They were very good to us and said, we're just not going to charge you it next year. We're going to let you phase you into it because we understand the budget, because they could be as high as $80,000 some years. So we're going down tomorrow to ODOT to negotiate a new contract with them, a contract with them. And I don't know exactly when I have to pay this. I paid this year's already, but they still want another item we're talking about. But I may have to come back to council this year yet to make that happen, but I'm not sure because we're not done. That's why we're going down tomorrow. So we put $30,000 in there.
Sure.
Because we know it wasn't going to be, there's going to be something more than 2. And we felt based on the agreement they had plugged in there for next year, 30,000. So we put 30,000 in there for the interim, and then for the permanent, we'll know what it is. And like I said, we may come back to council before the end of the year to sign that contract off to what it is and what it may be.
And I thank you, Mayor.
That's a long story.
No, but
what
that's
it
an
is.
excellent summation of what's going on here, and what I think that people out there that live in our city and wonder why our cost of doing business keeps increasing. And unfortunately, it's not keeping up with the amount of revenue we're pulling in and the amount of money that's being brought back for local funds back to Amherst, money that we give them. So I see this as another way of balancing the state budget on the backs of the cities, Amherst obviously being an example here again. And this is the kind of stuff that should be pointed
Yeah,
out
but
so
let
they
me
don't come
comment
to
on
us.
this.
On that.
You can look at it that way, or you can look at it for the past, since 1963, we've been getting away with murder and paying it $2,000 a year when it should have been 80. So you can look at this either way, and that's why we're going down to Ashland tomorrow to negotiate this, see what happens.
But it's not Amherst Route 2,
Yes, it
it's Ohio State Route 2.
But
And that's my opinion. I mean, that's just, we can differ on that. I just believe that
I
this
agree
is-
with you, but the fact of the matter is,
Yeah.
we're in the state of Ohio, and we're state statute. We
Right.
gotta go by their rules. That's why they're good enough to really negotiate with us, rather than just say, here's a $90,000 bill, take it or leave it.
Sure makes you want to consider a
So,
charter,
anyway,
doesn't it?
You'd have to pay it anyway, it wouldn't matter in this case.
And then, of course, it says permissive tax funds. There was on page 8, that goes street. I was just, in my apologies for my ignorance, I just noticed it went from 20,000 interim and 214 to 100,000, 215, 120, 216.
Yeah, I put it in there in case that negotiations with the state don't go well, and it's more than 30,000.
Got it. So this is another way
Yeah, I
to
knew
make sure we have it in the
right.
fund.
I
Fair
just-
enough.
I just backed that up.
I appreciate that. This is helping me to get my hands on why we see such increases in budget. And that's what I look for. I look for what are we getting with that increase. On the same page, 8 of 16, park and pool. Part-time wages goes from 30,000 to 47,500.
Yeah, if you remember, I just came back to council for a transfer in this. I tried to avoid that for next year. Plus, this is just the interim. The final budget, that'll be more like 70 or 80,000.
And so we're just budgeting a little bit higher, even though it may
Yeah,
be the
right.
same at the permit. So
Exactly.
this is just temporary. Make sure that, I'm kind of making sure that nothing's coming up in the next 3 months that
Right.
we should be surprised at. And then when that final budget comes in, I can really,
I don't want to
hammer
have
this
to
in.
come back, no, I won't be here anyway, but I don't want to come back to you in the interim for a transfer, a reappropriation. That's why some of these are little, because they're estimates, they're guesstimates. And normally they're pretty good, but we just wanted to make sure we didn't have to come back for any reappropriations during the first 3 months. Dave, you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Now, we had a kind of a what's the word I'm looking for? We had some adjustments in the Office on Aging, and is that going to balance out after this year?
Yeah,
Is
there's
that why
Office on
those two?
Aging, you'll see that's
Yeah.
first item with salaries.
Right.
That's to make the final payment to NINA.
Yes, and that kind of gets us to where we want to
After
be.
next year, yeah.
Fantastic, perfect. Okay, that answers that. Water Department, we had, on page 12, we had a capital outlay, 50% increase in the budget. I was just wondering if there's something at the Water Department that would jump us 50% in that interim.
What item?
Page 12, that'd be 600-5002-52501, capital outlay, at the bottom of the page, page 12 of 16.
That's just a guesstimate.
Okay, fair enough. And now that we're having this discussion, I think it's also helping to give a better idea of what to look for when it gets to the permanent budget coming up, you said, in about February, Mr. Otto?
Yeah, usually.
Well, with that, I don't see any large, you explained the energy purchase. I was hoping that contract we put together, is that going to?
No, that's just our electric bill, to cover our electric bill. That'll probably be 8 or 9 million for the final budget.
So are we, okay, so I believe that purchase was more beneficial. All right. Outside of that, it looks like you did, again, we just did the final budget for Utilities Department on page 15 to 16 for salaries and wages. From 155 to 234, that's a huge jump. I just wanted to see if there's anything.
This always also includes, it's not that much if you look at the end, it's only, I honestly don't know whether that's full amount or not.
Okay. But I guess I'm going to leave it with that, with the understanding that these are just either year-out budget, so the interim is actually going to cover a good portion of the 2016 budget, and there's nothing that we should be aware of as council as to major budgetary items that are going to be coming in front of us or that need to. So with that, Madam Chair, I'm good unless you guys got anything. I'm good. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Any other comments or questions? Mr. Winofsky.
I'd like to ask that we take this to the floor of the council as described. I believe it's with the emergency. It is.
Mr. Van.
Second that.
There's a motion and a second to take A15-46, which is the 2016 interim budget, to the floor of council with the emergency. Are there any additional comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call for a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion is carried 6-0. Goes to the floor of council with the emergency. The second item I have is A15-47, which is adopt final resolution with Ohio Department of Transportation authorizing the Safety Services Director to enter into a contract on State Route 58, Section 20.97, Federal Project Number E-130, parentheses 821, end parentheses PID 2393-1112, and authorizing payment for local share of project, declaring an emergency. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you. In my submittal, I attached the information regarding this request. If you remember, I talked to you earlier in the year where the state ODOT came to us and asked us for next year's resurfacing of Route 58, could we pay that, even though it's next year, so they could bid it out this year, our share this year. And we said we would wait and see. And they finally brought us the numbers here. And in conversation with Mr. Kukuka and Mark and the council president, we decided that we could afford to do that, so we could do this project next year. So on the information, you'll see that our share on their estimate is $198,000 plus $198,350. And so what we have to do, I'm asking for the emergency clause on this because I've got to get this back to Ashland and Columbus by November 2nd. Because they are bidding the job out on November 19th. So we need this, they need the money and they need the information and contract with us by the 2nd. So what we'll do is if we pass it next Monday, if we do, I'll make sure it's down to Ashland by that date. And also, we have to ask the emergency clause. And also, they also state in this legislation that they recognize that their estimates are sometimes not so good. And they are normally low. So this under 198,000 is a number they're estimating, but if it comes in higher, this also gives us the approval to pay whatever the extra is. So we're asking for the emergency clause on this so I can get it to Ashland. Thank you.
I'd like to note that Mr. Pecora came at 7:20. Are there any comments or questions? Mr. Van Tron.
I need to send this on to the board council papers.
Mr. Miller.
Second with a question.
Okay, continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is this work going to differentiate itself from what we were currently doing from Cooper Foster to Cleveland?
No.
Still
This is
catch
just-
basin, same type of,
Yes,
are they looking
catch
to do
basin,
water?
exactly.
Okay, so it's,
It's the same type of project, but hopefully not as bad and not as intense as it was, as 58 is becoming, this section. So hopefully it'll be a little easier, but I'm not an engineer or a contractor, so we hope for the best.
it looks like when they dug in there into those catch basins, I think they found that they had some serious work to do. Because I'm seeing a lot of time being spent, I don't know how much you, Mr. Costello, you've overseen that job, or if you work, I don't know who's in charge of that, but it seems like the time is due to that. Those catch basins are eating up a ton of their time.
They are, but they're getting closer.
And Mr. Costello, do you think that the curbing on 58 is going to be replaced, or is that probably
It's
not?
not part of the project.
Is that broken up curbing that's all along Route 58 going to have an impact?
ODOT project.
No. The curbing around, you know where the center line is, down by Sunoco and down by Ohio and Speedway and all that separator down there, that's gonna be dressed up a little bit. But we'd have spent another $200,000, $300,000 if we'd have gone to full curb repair and all that. So we just couldn't afford it if we wanted to do the projects that we've got. So I think it'll be a great project once it's done. It's just been laborious and very labor intensive. And we hopefully to look, the program we're asking for now will be the same type of program and not cost us any more money, but we'll have to wait and see till the bids come in.
All right, that answers my question. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Costello.
Any additional comments or questions? Seeing none, I will take a voice vote. All those in favor of taking A15-47 to the floor of council with the emergency signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion is carried 6-0. And A15-47 goes to the floor of council with the emergency. That's all I have, Mr. Winarski.
Motion to adjourn.
Mr. Miller?
Second, please.
A motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. We're adjourned with a voice vote of 6-0. Thank you.
Every city would be changing their rules and everything like that to start enforcing it. Nobody else has come up with any tax like this. And I keep hearing
I'd like to call to order the ordinance committee. And that clock's not it, so we're going to go with 7:26. We're going to use the attendance from the previous finance committee with Mr. Bukovac being excused. We have in front of you, I hope, it's been sent out a week ago, the amended sign ordinance, chapter 1149.01 to .99. Depending on how you print it and what color you print it in, you're going to see some strike-throughs, some new comments and changes. And what I would like to do is entertain questions or comments on what you've read. With that, Mr. Winarski.
So the goal for tonight is just to have a conversation. There's no anticipation of taking this up to the floor if yet.
If we get to that point where you feel we're ready to go and we're ready to move on that, then I think we can. But if there's still some things that we don't have questions answered to, I mean, that's up to council's privy to decide in the committee whether they want to table it again or to move forward. The whole goal of this is to fix this legislation, make the changes, and as you know, move forward.
Okay.
So with that, I really don't know exactly what questions people are going to have yet, but I'm hoping we move it.
Okay.
How's that? I'd like to get this
All right.
wrapped up.
And with your permission, I do have a lot of questions.
Fantastic.
And one of my concerns is one of the co-authors isn't here, so maybe we can follow up with the building inspector with any of these questions, or perhaps you or the law director have the answers. Earlier when we visited this, the page is numbered? No. With that, I'll reference what appears to be the first page, 1149.02. Section 10 describes excessive brightness as not to admit more than 10-foot candles as calculated measured foot candles. The distance is 1 meter from the sign. That's all well, fine, and dandy, but my concern is not the light at 1 meter, it's the light in someone's living room. I'd like to see something that describes the lumens, foot candles, whatever word you want to use, that the light not exceed that of a full moon or a simple street light. It can also, it would be the maximum foot candles, because you can measure like, either holding the instrument this way or this way. Whatever the maximum is, I prefer to see something. And once again, I'm not a big fan of the lights abutting a residential area or in a residential area, but I am willing to compromise, and that would be the one thing I would look for to have included if I were to even consider voting yes on this. We'll go into the same section 1149.02, item number 33. A wall sign is not to be any higher than the top of a building. I was just wondering what the thinking was for there with that.
It's a great question. And it can be interpreted as if it's a wall sign, it would be on the wall. How's it going to be above the building? We can look at that language.
Okay.
Which is attached directly to or painted upon a building.
Okay, yeah, if you could help me with that. I'll probably go to the law director, Mr. Carlson. I see in here, and sometimes it references the square footage on one side of a sign. It also discusses an aggregate square footage. If I'm not mistaken, aggregate would be not just one side of a sign, but both sides if it's a double-sided sign, and the total number of signs in a yard. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's correct.
Okay.
And where you're referring to where it says...
Oh, I'm sorry.
sign
We're going to go to 1149.03 is where I have my first note. It describes, in some instances, one square footage on one side of a sign, and then it also describes aggregate.
4904?
149.04.
Okay. I think so. Okay, 04.
And I do think there's some wisdom in that. I was a little confused because in some instances it doesn't use consistent verbiage.
So you want square footage across all signage?
Well, I just wanted to understand. I wasn't sure if the law director is comfortable with this language. I'm comfortable with it. I guess ultimately, if something goes before, ZBA, will they be comfortable interpreting it and making a decision?
Where do you see the word aggregate in 114904? I'm not saying it isn't.
Okay. Bear with me here. Maybe that's just where I made the note.
There's a reference to aggregates in connection with temporary signs, certainly.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, just when we're discussing the signs in general, I just noticed sometimes it was referenced as square footage on one side of a sign, and in some instances that the word aggregate was used.
Bottom line on that
Page 11,
page that you're on. 1149.
Right, but the whole goal of my question is, if you're comfortable with it, that's fine, and if you're comfortable that ZBA would be able to use this information, that's fine. I just had a question about it.
I do see it on 114905B. There's a reference to aggregate signage. So that's on a corner lot, and they're going to add the total, surface area of the sign together to arrive at the aggregate. I guess you should understand that when we look at this, that a lot of the language in here is existing language under the current ordinance. And I guess a question can be raised about whether that makes sense, whether we want to revisit the entire sign ordinance and look at every single provision to see if we want to change things. I mean, that's certainly a legitimate exercise we could undertake, but I think the council should understand that there are two primary changes to the sign ordinance. One relating to electronic changeable message signs and definitions that relate to that, and restrictions that relate to that. And then the other kind of wholesale change relates to temporary signs. The process of arriving at this draft is kind of piecemeal, I'll say that. And I was describing it to the chairperson before the meeting that David McCartney made certain recommended changes way back, I think in October of last year, that he and I got together, made revisions to those changes. And then before one of our recent meetings, the law director raised a legitimate issue about temporary signs, and specifically the political signs. And that suggestion led to the wholesale changes in temporary signs. But a lot of what you see is existing, and you should probably see it as such. I don't know if that's helpful.
no, Mr. Carlson, I think that's an excellent way to summarize it, because what we're trying to do is change the two areas that we've had challenges with. When I sat on the Board of Zoning Appeals, that was one of the biggest things we had, was these electronic signs. And another one of the areas of contention over the last few years has been the temporary signs. So we are attempting to clean up the entire language if need be. If you see something here that you believe needs to be addressed because of future potential problems, I'm for entertaining that as well. I think that this is this total aggregate of the two signs for business on-premise advertising purposes. I don't think we've had a problem with that. Mr. Carlson, you've been working with the BZA longer than I've been on it, so
That's never been an issue.
that's never been an issue. So I think we just ran with the same language, and unless you have something you think would.
No, if the law director's comfortable that this, one of the things we've talked about since day one here is that we've got ordinances that need to be modified and cleaned up.
Absolutely.
If in your opinion this achieves that, that's great.
And the process by which that is done is kind of important. And, oftentimes what a municipality will do is they'll actually hire a consultant to review what you have, and then to meet with, let's say, a committee that that may be appointed by council to look at possible revisions, and then come back to the council with suggestions about revisions. You know, why is a consultant valuable? Well, a consultant kind of brings in a perspective that is valuable from the point of view that the consultant is familiar with probably a number of ordinances from a number of municipalities, and he can look at what you have and say, you know, these are some of the hot button issues that you need to be concerned about. This is how you might address that. And it's a difficult thing to revise an entire chapter of an ordinance without that kind of help. So what we have is kind of an in-house effort now, and it's admittedly somewhat ad hoc about how we've gone about doing this. But so what we're doing, as I said, is we're fixing a couple of big things, and we're leaving a lot of stuff alone. And that isn't to say that the stuff that we're leaving alone shouldn't be looked at in its entirety at some point, you know. And I think, but I can tell you with surety that the same thing could be said about probably any chapter of any ordinance in the state of Ohio. I think Amherst has a lot of those because you have kind of a history of ad hoc revisions. But that's a big job, and it's an expensive job if you're going to, you know, do it in the manner that I've kind of described to you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Mr. Van Kuren?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Still have
Apologize.
more.
No.
Sorry.
Mr. Van Kuren, I thought Mr. Wodarski
I
was...
can wait.
No.
Please, continue on.
It appears to have been renamed 1149 it used to be 08, it's been blued out to be .07 now. And item number F has to do with the special event signs that the mayor can give approval. That's been lined out. I kind of like that. Why are we getting rid of that?
That was my edit, and here's my thinking behind that. I think that it's a preferable solution that you simply allow temporary signs. If you have the mayor, if you put the mayor in a position to say, this sign is okay, but this sign isn't, I think you're looking at potential legal problems, because on what basis is the mayor going to decide that this is okay and this isn't? Is it going to be the content of the sign? You know, if it's you know, somebody wants to have a religious message sign, and the person has to come to the mayor. Well, that's the wrong example. If you're going to deal with community special event signs differently than you're going to deal with political signs, you have already created a distinction based upon content. And I think Tony's going to tell you that it's those kinds of distinctions that get you in trouble. That why do you prefer community event signs over political signs? Or why do you require a procedure for approval of community event signs if you don't require it of different kinds of signs? So what my proposal is, you don't make any of those distinctions. You just permit them in every single district in the city. Is that a little bit scary? Yeah. I mean, but the alternative may be more scary in the sense that you're sued by somebody, and if they win the lawsuit, you're paying their attorney's fees to bring the suit. So that's my thinking. So we're taking the mayor out of the middle of that issue, in my view.
Okay, thank you. Let's see here. Can we go to 1149? It is now .9 now. It used to be .11. Excuse me. So illumination, it's red. Is that significant? Has this been eliminated? Or is it just a different color to let us know there's changes?
The different colors, the purple ones on mine, I don't know how they came out on yours, are Dave's revisions.
Okay.
The red ones were kind of the things that I had worked on.
Okay. Then I'll just throw the question out there, and maybe I'll have to follow up with the building inspector later. But in that section, item number 3, prior to the issuance of any permit, get a certification, and it goes on to say that if there's any testing to be done, it says who will pay for it. Well, why are we getting in that? Why do we tell them who's gonna pay for it? Don't we just make sure it's in compliance?
Well, I mean, part of what may happen is this, that they come before the city with an application for the electronic message sign. And let's say Dave is unsure about whether or not it's going to meet with the requirements of the section. And part of the issue of whether it does may require some kind of testing by some organization that does these kinds of things, and who it might be, I don't know. I think he's just trying to make it clear that if that kind of testing is required, it might be an issue of brightness, it might be something else, that it's got to be on the applicant's dime and not the city's, which I think makes sense.
Is it like proving your dog's been rabies have been given shots for? Here you provide a certificate and say, okay, now you can get your license for your dog.
It just seems to me it would be, that would be an issue between the manufacturer and the person that's requesting the sign. If the purpose is, okay, they come to us and we ask for this study
Yeah.
or whatever, okay, it's on your dime. Is that
That's
what we're
what
working
I
towards
think
here?
he's trying to say there.
Okay, well, I'll ask Dave. I'll follow
All
up
right.
with him. Okay. And once again, if we go to 114916, please. Item B, this has to deal with the design review board. In B, it says the application will be reviewed by design review. I ask again that we change that to may. And if that impacts other legislation that we have, I'd like to ask that we change that also.
Now, you have to point me in the right direction.
I'm sorry.
because I see some numbering problems already in mine, but,
Without a page number, what I have here, it's the third to the last page.
okay.
Once again, that's 1149.16.
Signs in downtown historic district?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Section B, about the middle of the paragraph, it says the application will be reviewed by design review board.
Okay.
I don't feel it necessarily needs to be, everything needs to be reviewed by design review, excuse me. If we could change the word will to may.
Well, that represents a serious
No.
policy change, I think, and I'll let Tony address that.
Yeah, because again, it gets into the situation of who makes the decision of what would then be reviewed. It becomes discretionary, and then it gets to the point where the design review board makes some of it for an onerous task, or presenting something for one instance but not another. And then we're not treating individuals the same. And that's something either it's shall or not.
Okay.
And I think that the policy behind this special provision about signs in the historic district is that the city really wants to be careful about what kind of signage goes down there to protect kind of the aesthetic integrity of the district. And the way you do that is that you have every sign reviewed and not just some of them. And I think that that's appropriate. And that gets to what your question to me earlier. So thank you.
Okay. Alrighty. Very good. Let's see, I just had one more. Where did that go here? Chimney, entrance.
What about permits for something? Let's get that. If the building inspector issues a permit for a sign,
Yeah.
and then you go to design review board and they turn it down.
Well, it goes through the building department. As long as the law director is comfortable with it. And one final thing here, and that goes to, it's still in that design review, the historic district. I believe it's mentioned in here twice, yeah, in section A and section G. It's redundant. It mentions the preservation district twice and the boundaries. It just seemed like it's some extra verbiage in there that doesn't need to exist. I think you can safely throw out section G because it's described in section A.
Okay. That may be true. That's what you've got now, and it may not be necessary to have both sections.
And with that, I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me dominate your meeting.
Mr.
Carry
Winarski, you are, no, you're good. We appreciate everything that council brings to the committees, all the members, and their ability to see something that could be possibly missed or could be a potential problem, so invited for sure. Mr. Ventura, and I apologize, and we are at your...
Just a quick observation. I think Mr. Carlson made some great comments a little earlier about how ambitious and time-consuming a process this is. And I think that a lot of legislative bodies would be turned off by this, but I think this is a real testament to the elected officials and the appointed officials in the city that we're tackling this. I know that there are a core group of people who are paying the most attention to this and working hard on it. Mr. Miller's one of them. Certainly Mr. Carlson, our building director. I wanted to compliment all three of you on the job you're doing. I can't tell you how happy I am that we're spending so much time focusing on legislation, which is, I really think, what our job is, rather than things like resolutions that I might complain about every now and then. But I think this is what people are paying us to do, and I think the three I mentioned in particular are doing a great job. And I hope that we tackle other legislation like this in the future too. So just my compliments to the chair and to the other officials who are involved in this. You're doing a great job.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Ditto. Thank you very much for that, and we'll entertain any other questions or comments.
I want to point out that I think the council ought to really look at my rewrite for the temporary sign section, and that would be under 114906. You know, I've just kind of cobbled together here some, what I think are common sense regulations about temporary signs. And this is all coming out of basically my head with the, well, I've looked at other ordinances as well, but, so they're, you know, categories A through H. No temporary sign shall be placed on property without the consent of the owner. I mean, that's, I think, fairly straightforward and obvious. No temporary sign shall be placed in a manner which obstructs the view of the traveling public at or near intersecting roadways or rights of way, or which hinder pedestrian traffic. They were in the rubric that followed that. There were a number of things that addressed that, but they were all kind of generally trying to say that, you know. So you don't want to put big signs at a corner because somebody can't, if they're stopped at the corner, they can't see it. And then this gives the building inspector the authority to go out there and say, hey, look, you got to move your signs, please. No temporary sign shall be illuminated or have moving elements. That makes sense. No temporary sign shall have a height which exceeds 4 feet. I mean, again, 4 feet, where do I come up with that? It's just, I know that political signs are lower than that. Most realtor signs are going to be lower than that. But we don't want a sign that's much higher than that, so that 4 feet made sense. Now, you can tell me you don't like that, and I might agree with you. No single sign shall have an area on a single face of the sign which exceeds 6 square feet. So, you know, where did I come up with that? I mean, I look at what a realtor sign, how big those are. I look at maybe your typical garage sale sign, maybe a larger political sign. You don't want a sign that's too big. I mean, if particularly in a residential district, and I thought that would be a sensible kind of restriction. And then I say you can't have an aggregate of temporary signs in excess of 48 feet. That's, you know, if you take your average political sign, each face is 3 feet about. Most political signs have 2 faces, so each single sign has 6 feet. This gives the property owner the chance to have 8 political signs in their yard. Is that a sensible restriction? It might be. As we discussed before the meeting and driving around the town, I don't see properties with many more than 4 signs. So is 8 kind of an onerous restriction? I don't think so. All temporary signs shall be maintained in such a manner as to not become deteriorated and thereby unsightly. So let's say somebody wants, it's not a political sign, but it's a religious sign. And they want to, you know, praise the Lord or something like that, which is a legitimate thing for a temporary sign in a residential area. But what the city's interest in that sign is not so much that it's there, but the city has an interest that it not look unsightly. So this is saying that, you know, that you can't have a, you know, broken down, soggy cardboard sign. Yes. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson.
Just to finish up, and then maybe we can have, And then there's a limit on how long signs can be up there. And again, I'm pulling this out of my head. If a sign is related to an event, so it's a yard sale, it might be one of those community event signs. And it certainly would be a political sign. We want the sign down in 7 days. The city has an interest that you not have signs up in the yard that are for an event that's gone by. Why should you have them? The date on which the sign, in the opinion of the building official, becomes unreasonably deteriorated. So if it becomes that, in that condition, the building official can go out and say, take it down. Or 90 days after the date of its first placement. That's a little bit of a risk on the 90 days. But we're making it apply across the board to all temporary signs. So we're not saying political signs can't be up for longer than 90 days, but yard sale signs can. So I don't know. That's something that you probably should give some thought to and discuss about whether or not that makes sense. To have any time limitation, number one, or whether 90 days is reasonable. The mayor thinks it's unreasonable.
I'd like 3 days. Get them up and down.
Okay. What about a realtor sign, for example, which is a temporary sign? A house is for sale. I mean, it's going to be sitting there for a period of time.
That might be longer than 90 days.
I know, it might be longer than 90 days. Who's going to blow the whistle? You know?
Mine was up for 6 months.
Yeah.
4 sales.
I wouldn't want one of my.
Okay, that's all I have to
Mowing
say
the
about the
grass.
temporary sign.
No, thank you, Mr. Carlson. That explains that. There are a few questions I have as well that we'll have a discussion about. Mr. Van Churen, I believe, has another question.
Yeah, really quick, and I don't want to open another can of worms. This might be covered in another ordinance, but what about, and we all know that there are things that some people put in their yards, and Amherst included, I can give a few examples, but I'm not going to call out private properties, that bridge the gap, that sort of walk the line between a sign and a structure, let's say.
Oh.
I think you know what I mean. Various junk that people put in their yards. I know we have ordinances against junk in yards,
Yeah.
but some of these things that people put in their yards could be construed as a symbol for something they support or something like that. Does this cover that kind of thing? I mean, at what point does something become not a sign and it becomes a structure? I can give you more specific examples, but I don't want to name specific yards.
I've heard rumors about somebody hanging things from there.
Well, not even that, but does this only specifically refer to things that have, so signs that are, paper, plastic, whatever they are, and they have something written on them?
It deals with temporary signs, and temporary signs are defined in the section 114902, and it says, means a sign, banner, or other advertising device with or without a structural frame intended for a limited period of display.
All right. Okay, and I don't want to open another can of worms. It was just a question. But that's something that we can talk more about offline.
Mr. Van Churen, just if you refer back to that second page, that would be number 31. At the bottom, it even says, but not limited to displays for holidays or public. So if you're putting out a creche or some other form of display, that could be considered temporary signage.
Okay.
It probably.
So displays in general.
Because that could say advertising.
I mean, we have ordinances that prevent people from junking up their yard. I mean, that doesn't cover it.
That's a good point.
I'm just thinking about someone saying, well, this is a sign and it's an illustration of my,
I had lined through the word display because there was no comma after display, so it said means a display sign. I didn't know what that meant. So now what your comment makes is more clear what the intent of that was. I think we ought to put the word display back in.
Agreed.
The definition, and it would arguably cover those kinds of things.
So a pole in somebody's yard with ceremonial stuff hanging off of it that they keep up year long would be covered under this?
It would be.
Okay.
In that case, yeah.
Oh, good question. It's a good question that needs to. And
I
I
think
think
more
this is going to help.
specific than I meant, but I think I needed to specifically test. Okay.
And I think this will help us get that piece of legislation worded properly.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, I just had a couple items, and temporary signs is where we're also getting a hang up in addition to the illuminated signs. I know I've seen a couple real estate signs that are higher than 4 feet. Do we have them come to the BZA for a variance if they're putting up signs that are above that 4 feet? That obviously would mean,
That would be what they would have to do.
right, and if not, they're gonna say our posts and signs are set up for, because you'll get the hanging,
I think so.
you know, real estate posts that'll get up there a little higher. But they'll just have to put it at that height or get a variance. And then the 8 signs, I think that seems reasonable. If you have a property of 2 acres of frontage, you know, I could see people going, well, and so therefore that becomes a variance. This is the kind of things that we're discussing. How could we make, and I think Mr. Winarski said it best, how do we word this in such a way that it won't keep coming up? There won't be variances being asked, and if they are, it's very easy to rule on them. And then finally, my question, the 7 days after event, whatever period that was agreed upon, I think that sounds fair. That gives usually a week or weekend to pick up signs, and I think that's fair. But my question is, what if somebody puts a sign in or somebody else puts a sign in that wasn't intended? Does the city have the ability to just remove it and say, pick it up at the city building department? Because if it's something that's nailed to a post, you know, or if is there a way for us to do more than just contact the owner? Because what if there's no response back, or they're not getting the, hey, this is the Amherst City Building Department, you have a sign saying, we buy your houses. Oh, sorry, you have the wrong number, or, you know, and they just sit out there. Do we have an ability to remove those signs?
Without researching the issue, my preliminary opinion would be no. Because they're the property of somebody else, and the city is then removing and taking control of and possessing somebody else's property without a warrant, for example.
If it's in a right of way or.
If
it's
it
in the
now,
right of
if
way,
it gets
that's
in front of
another
the
issue.
sidewalk or in the right of way, or
It shouldn't be
on
in the right of way.
on a public property, utility
Yeah,
pole,
yeah.
things like
I
that.
think the city could remove those.
The city could
but
remove
I-
this? Because that's a question that was asked, and I'm like, good question, I don't have an answer there.
It's in
You
the
were
city
there.
right away.
I'm sorry, Mr. McCord?
If it's in the city right away or on city utility poles or anything the city controls or for instance, any type of utility pole, right away, et cetera, we could remove. It's our, technically, it's kind of our property, especially the right of ways. That's why you're not allowed to have signs in the city right away. It's the city's right of way.
Okay,
So.
thank you, Mr. McCord. Mr. Venture?
And this was a specific question. I got a phone call from a resident on who caught wind of the fact that we're discussing this legislation. And Mr. Miller referred to the home showing signs that often on the weekend, a lot of these companies will come in and put in on private property and then pull them out before the city comes back to work. And the question was, well, can we put into the legislation that it's illegal for them to do so on private property where they did not get permission? I think it's already illegal, isn't it? And if so,
Yes.
although the city can't come in and take it, could the private property owner, I don't know, let the city know that it's happening, and the city can take some sort of legal action, or I mean, what's the protocol?
Well, there's a penalty provision for this ordinance, which is 1149.99. So I suppose if you found out who placed the sign on somebody's property without their permission, that's a violation of the ordinance, because it says that a temporary sign shall only be erected with the permission of the property owner. So they could be issued a citation and a summons for a violation under 1149.99. Now, it's $50, a maximum of $50.
I'm just thinking of ways to stop particularly these businesses that go in and on the weekends when the city's not, and no one's working, they set these signs up on certain private property and then they pull them down again.
Well, I think the way to handle that is somebody's got to make a complaint to the building department.
Okay.
And then I think the building department has to address the issue with the person placing the sign.
Right.
And maybe informally they go out and say, look, you're violating our ordinance, we want you to stop. If you don't stop, then,
We do that now.
yeah, they probably do it now.
We do it
Yeah.
now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Venture. Ms. Russell?
I have a question for Mr. Carlson. The city can't remove these signs that are on private property. How about if the homeowner says, well, I don't want that sign on my property.
I I think the homeowner could remove a sign, that's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone puts a sign in your yard that doesn't belong there, you could remove it. I imagine if anyone puts anything in your property that doesn't belong there, you could remove it. I mean, and I don't think there's any ramifications. I mean, they're at their own risk. They're trespassing, first of all. If they're on your property, they're trespassing. If you don't want their sign there, remove it, throw it away.
I guess there's a number of people that are putting signs out right now that, you know,
Sure,
sure.
Yeah, if someone puts a sign in your yard and you don't want it there, number one, they're trespassing, and number two, is take their sign and destroy it, throw it in the trash like I do. So, sorry,
Thank you, Ms. Masoga. Any further questions? That's complete. All right, thank you. But it doesn't seem that we have a motion, and it seems that we have some questions that still need to be followed up, maybe even some wording that needs to be redone. With that, Ms. Wasso?
I move that we table this till the next meeting. I think there's probably going to be enough done. Mr. Carlson, you'll...
No, I think that's a good thing,
Okay.
and I think that Mr. Miller ought to contact Mr. McCartney and request that he attend the next meeting. And I can do another revision to kind of show some of the changes we've discussed today.
Frank, can you paginate the numbers too?
Pardon me?
Can you paginate the pages?
I can do that, yeah.
Thank you.
If I can figure out how to do it.
1, 2, 3, 4.
We can take it.
All right, with that, I have a motion on the floor to table this to the second. Mr. Goodell?
Second.
We have a second. And all those in favor will take a voice. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Ayes have it. We tabled to October.
November.
Oh, we're going to move into November already. In favor of adjourning? Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Adjourn at approximately 8:04.
Paginate? Is that really a word?
Yeah, that'll.